Hi there, it's Tracy DeVette from tracydevette.com here again. And this is the second video in my course on relationships. So if you see my first one, you'll know that I'm the child of divorced parents and I've gone through a divorce myself. And I'm remarried somebody who's been divorced before. And because of my age, I have now seen that life cycle play out. And not only in my life, but people that I've known, and know with studying psychology and studying through the Gottman Institute, I feel like I'm in a fairly unique position to help people with one of the biggest issues to sort of hit society, and that is modern living and how it destroys relationships. So in the previous video, I was explaining why it's a good idea to try and save your relationship and make things better for the future. Unless, of course, there are a few caveats that if you're undergoing any kind of abuse, that needs to get sorted. It's not necessarily the end of a relationship. People can get help. And normally people who do abuse do need help. That's why they're abusers in the first place, because they have their own insecurities and their own problems. But my advice is, if that's happening, is to distance yourself and your children while they get that help. Then at least it's keeping you safe. But other than that, nearly every marriage can and probably should be saved, because when you see the big picture, most of us, and we've all been there, I'm sure, where we've had some bad times with our partner, and we think, well, perhaps if we just get rid of this one and get somebody else instead, they'll be better in this way, that way, the other way. And of course, this is always a dream, and that other person probably doesn't exist in real life, because everybody has problems. Nobody's perfect, and you're taking on somebody new who not only has to fall in love with you and think you're great for it to be a great relationship, but also has to navigate the maelstrom of children that are not theirs. They may have children who are not yours, and you have to compromise. And if you speak to those children later on, it's so difficult to get it right. It's much easier to get it wrong, and then you've got all these these people who should be the most precious in your life, you actually end up damaging for life. And really, it's not their fault, is it? They didn't ask to be born. You're the one that had the children, and you and the partner that you're with, husband or otherwise, you need to take that responsibility and try and give them the best life that you can. And the best life that you can give them, in my opinion and from my observation, is a mum and a dad who is engaged with the process and does what they can to keep a stable home life for the children. So putting that aside and moving on, I'm now going to give you some tips on what actually happens, or some information actually on what actually happens, how relationships get into a bad way. So most relationships start off exciting. There's lots of sexual tension. There's lots of expectation. You think you communicate quite a lot, and you think you're really similar in things. And love starts to blossom and to bloom. And it's very similar for nearly every person on the planet, because it actually is an ancient mating ritual, if you want to call it that. Animals have it the same. Theirs is a bit more predictable, and a lot of them don't stay together. It's not in the best interest of their genes to do so, but it is in the best interest of human genes for partners to stay together. And that's why marriage was invented thousands of years ago, because it just makes for a much more stable family and happier generations going forward, and it stabilizes society as well. I'm not criticizing or putting anybody down who doesn't have the conventional marriage or living together situation. That's just beyond the scope of this talk here. You can carry on watching if you want. It's just that I'm my actual practice and the way that I do things, there are certain relationships that would benefit from what I'm about to say, and there are the ones that this might not be relevant at all. So please don't be offended if you're not married and you're not with the father of your children now, and you've already remarried somebody who's perhaps got children of their own, etc. It's not meant to criticize or make you feel bad in any way at all. I just want to help. And going forward, I'm giving you the according to the Gottman Institute, what to look out for and how you know when your relationship is getting into trouble. So John Gottman, or Dr. John Gottman, has coined this phrase of the horsemen of the apocalypse. And if you know anything about scriptures, religious scriptures, there's talk that at the end of the world, these 4 horsemen come. I've forgotten what they are, to be honest. They're like pestilence and things. Yes, so getting back to Dr. John Gottman, he's done research for years, and he's come up with this phrase of the he's come up with this phrase of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And if you're familiar with Jewish or Christian scriptures, you'll know that in the scripture, it does talk about 4 horsemen that come in and they release all sorts of negativity in the world, and they cause chaos and basically bad stuff. And he's likened what happens in a relationship or a marriage to these 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. They come in and they start to cause chaos and destruction. And if you don't get a handle on them, they will cause a lot of damage and maybe even cause relationships to break up. And that's what we're trying to avoid. So he's noticed for years and years of observing couples, and he actually puts them into a place where their behavior is recorded, and they get on with their lives as if the cameras aren't there, and he records how they interact. And his teaching is so accurate that if you notice what's going on with a relationship and see how couples are interacting, they can predict whether a marriage is going to fail or succeed, something like 86% of the time. It may even be higher now as the research has got more current. And of course, recording has become easier and more prolific. So the 4 horsemen are, the first one is criticism. The second one is contempt. The third one is what he calls stonewalling. And the 4th one is defensiveness. So let's look at criticism. If you or your partner find yourself getting into that negative critical mode, you could be criticizing each other. You could be just criticizing stuff that you're watching on TV. You could be criticizing your neighbors, people that you know, and you could be criticizing your children even, or who your children are interacting with. If you find yourself being a critical person, and this is something that you most probably learned from your parents or from significant others in your life, it's a very suspicious, critical thinking mode. And not critical thinking in a good way. This is criticism, critical thinking in a very negative way. So in that way, you become a very hard to please person. And here is the clue. If you're very critical and you find yourself criticizing others, second guessing what they're doing, looking down on them, thinking you can do better, you, your partner, or both of you, see that as a huge red flag, because all you're doing is inviting negativity into your life in a big way. And when you first start off and you find this partner and you've both got this critical thinking mind, as in criticism, critical thinking, not intelligent critical thinking, criticizing mind, you might feel like that unites you because it's something that you both do, and you can both, I don't know, talk about people, talk about situations or whatever, and it seems like it's a bonding process. But when it turns against you, it can be incredibly abrasive and destructive. And so that's one of the habits. If you catch yourself having that negative thinking, wanting to criticize others, having a certain amount of jealousy almost, or envy for others, putting other people down, take that as a clue that there is a problem. And if you don't start to address it, it can build up, and it can turn back on you and become something very negative in the future. And also, the longer that you live, the more you realize that that negative thinking is just a horrible, horrible burden and like bunch of crap that you've dragged around your whole life, thinking that this was a good idea, thinking that it means you're intelligent or you're better than anybody else or whatever. But actually, it's just hiding insecurities. And as a therapist, I can say that because I see it all the time. So criticizing is your first clue that something is going amiss. And if it's just at the criticizing stage now, that's great, because you watch this video, you're now aware of it, and you could do something about it. And if you click and subscribe, like and subscribe my videos, I'll be revealing quite a lot of these hints and tips that you can do. And of course, you can work with me one-to-one if you find that this is happening. So going forward, so the first one is criticism. So criticizing each other, difficult to please, nitpicking, seeing the bad in someone all the time, and getting despondent and disappointed and feeling that those dreams that you had are not going to be as you want, and you start looking for reasons why this relationship shouldn't be working or not working, giving you an excuse to look elsewhere. So that's criticism. Contempt happens when the criticism goes one step further. And then it becomes a very, very destructive form of criticism. So the difference is, criticizing might be, oh, you always slam that door when you come in. I wish you wouldn't do it. You keep waking up the kids. So just put them to bed. Why do you do that? It turns into contempt when that sentence goes something like this. You keep coming in and you're slamming the door. I've spoken to you about this already, and I've asked you not to. What's wrong with you? Why are you not getting this? Why do you feel that it's okay for you to come in and slam that door and not give a shit about anybody else, especially the kids I've just spent 20 minutes putting to bed? Can you see the difference? So now it's not just the behavior that you're unhappy and you're commenting on. You're now spreading that out to like they're a really bad person. They're, it's gone from just slamming a door to now like, what's wrong with you? You're inconsiderate, you're selfish, and you're just nasty. And the truth of that is that while you do have a right to be upset about something like that, because if you have just spent 20 minutes putting the children to bed, and now, the door's slammed and there's a noise, and, they've been woken up, and that's not good for them or good for you, So the reason is valid, but it's the way that you're saying it, and you're globalizing it. So it's not just the behavior that's bad. You're making them feel like everything about them is bad. And what will eventually happen is that person will get very despondent, very unhappy, and go, well, they don't love me anymore anyway. I'm obviously a burden to them. They hate having me around, so I might as well look elsewhere and find somebody else to meet my needs. And that's unfortunately a fact of what happens. So we've gone criticizing, it's moved to contempt, where it's globalizing it. It's not just the thing that's bad. It's like you're selfish. What's wrong with you? Who do you think you are? That kind of thinking. You're an idiot. Blah, blah, blah. Very, very negative. So then the next one is stonewalling. I prefer the term brick walling, actually, because stonewalling kind of brings something else to mind. I quite like stone walls. I live in England, where we're surrounded by these beautiful dry stone walls. So in my mind, a stone wall is a thing of beauty, whereas a brick wall, it's square and it's harsh, and it's more what's happening. So when you're stonewalling, you're starting to pull up this sort of protective wall around you, and you're not listening to that criticism and that contempt anymore. And you're sitting behind this wall, not communicating, but you're getting more and more entrenched in the behaviors that the other person is finding difficult. And you're getting more entrenched because of the way that they're attacking you. And it's just the way human nature is. Somebody attacks you, somebody criticizes you, somebody wants you to do something that you don't want to do, you start to push back, and you start to protect yourself, those vulnerable parts of yourself. So you become hardened, you become less communicative. It might explode into anger every now and again, but part of the stone walling or the brick walling is because you don't want to keep arguing and you don't want to keep fighting about it. So you'd rather shut yourself off from it. But when you start shutting yourself off like that, you're shutting yourself off from the good as well as the bad. And that can signal the slippery slope down, that cascade into complete negativity where nobody wants to save this relationship. And all you've done is both of you have got the eye on the door rather than concentrating on what's here, what's fixable, and what's good for your children. And then the fourth one is defensiveness. And defensiveness is you get to the stage where you feel so picked on, you feel so criticized, the contempt has happened, and you're shocked that this person that you're sharing your life with and supposed to be intimate with and comfortable and trusting with has literally just shot you down full of holes, because they're bringing up everything that they could possibly think that's wrong with you, accusing you of things that probably you never even intended. So when you came in and you slammed the door, you didn't realize you were waking up the kids. You were just happy to be home. You've had a long day at work. You've come home. Hi, honey, I'm home. Kicked off your boots, come in. All you want to do is come and give people a cuddle and say, what's for dinner? It's great to be home. And you've gotten greeted by this contempt. You're so selfish. Why have you just made that noise? I've just spent 20 minutes putting the kids to bed and getting them to sleep, and you have just ruined it. What's wrong with you? So in that way, they start to become really defensive. And what they've also observed is that there is a male-female difference in these. So in most relationships, the first person to bring up the unhappinesses, usually the female, usually the mother, the wife. they're the first one to actually start silently resenting things, and eventually start to come out because they feel they have to say something. Men are not that sensitive normally, and they're not that good at picking up on negative cues, and they think things are okay. They might think you're just going through a bit of a tough time because the kids are young and you're not sleeping properly. They have no idea that the thoughts are as catastrophic as what you have as a woman. So the woman is the first one usually that brings up the negativity or the dissatisfaction, should we say, with the marriage. When it comes to contempt, that's about equal. Once it starts, the other one joins in as well. And there doesn't seem to be too much of a difference between who brings that up. That seems to be fairly equal. And looking at human nature, I can kind of see why. When it comes to the brick walling, that tends to be male. So more men would rather hide behind literally the newspaper or nowadays your phone than confront the issues. And it's not that they're particularly scared to confront the issues. They just don't like the unpleasantness. They're far more sensitive to verbal attack than females. And of course, what are women good at? Normally, verbal attack. So that's why they're building this brick wall around them. And that brick wall can also come up because their needs are not being met. Sometimes when children arrive, the relationship changes and it becomes all about the children rather than the partner. And so they feel left out. And this is a way of sort of shoring up their defenses so that they can handle whatever's coming at them and sort of keep themselves from being triggered all the time into this unpleasantness because they don't like it. And men in general don't particularly like confrontation. And they don't like arguing about things that they don't think are particularly important. And of course, women think those things are very important. And so that's where the mismatch becomes. So that's where the mismatch starts to come in. And then the last one, defensiveness. Well, both parties can be equally guilty of this defensiveness. And there again, it is a natural human reaction. Somebody starts to attack you verbally or physically, but we're not talking about physical stuff here that I mentioned at the beginning. That needs sorting out separately. But verbal attack, especially when there's a grain of truth in what the other person is saying, then it hurts all the more. And then we start to become really defensive, and then the whole thing cycles round again. So start criticizing, that criticism becomes contemptuous, the contempt leads to brick walling, mostly in men, and then the defensiveness, everybody has to start defending their position themselves because they feel like their very being is being attacked. And once that starts, you can get so hurt and so despondent about it that you start to think, well, is there any point in even being with this person? Because if they think I'm that bad, or they're that critical, or I'm that unpleasant to be around, maybe it's better we just go our separate ways and find somebody easier to live with. And of course, that's pie in the sky, isn't it? Because that's pie in the sky, isn't it? Because that's pie in the sky, isn't it? Because as I've previously discussed, leaving a partner who you can make certain demands on because they are their children, you're not going to be able to make those demands with any other partner that you have in the future. So you will have to compromise. You do compromise, and then you turn around years later and think, shucks, if only I had compromised with the father of the children or the mother of the children back in the day, all of this crap that we've been through for years and years. And it doesn't stop, let me tell you, even when your kids are big and they have children of their own, there's still, especially if it was an acrimonious breakup, there is still this big disappointment and this sorrow almost that it happened and that you couldn't have held it together, because people also mellow as they get older. And you would find that the things that irritate you now are not going to irritate you in 15 to 20 years' time. You'll have a different mindset. And if only you had stuck it together like successful couples do, you'd be in a much better place. Because I don't think there's many people that I've ever come across that have been thankful that they've got divorced. They might be thankful that they got themselves out of a situation, but they're not proud of the fact that they had to get divorced. You know, there's things that you can do and people can change, and both of you just have to be willing to let go of that very hard shell that you've built around yourself in the brick walling and defensive stage, and start to consider that you might be contributing to the problem. And however nice you are as a person, you are contributing to the problem without realizing it. So it's nothing to do with here about good and bad people and good and bad behavior. It's just about what you're willing to do to accommodate each other and think about what's going to actually keep the relationship together, that is more important than your own ideas and wants at the time. So if you need any help with this, click below, get in touch, like and subscribe, because in the next video, I'm going to be giving you examples of each and every one of the 4 horsemen and what you can do to mitigate them. And as Dr. Gottman would say, divorce-proof your marriage.